Hello, welcome to lesson 8.1. I've entitled this video, Conflicts and Compromises. This video is going to cover pages 479 to 487. Take a look at this cartoon. It has a lot of insight. Feel free to pause the video if you'd like to get a little bit more into what it's trying to say, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Conflicts and Compromises. In 1819, there were 11 free states in the North and 11 slave states in the South. The North and South had different economies, political views, and ideas about slavery. These differences created a growing sectionalism. Sectionalism is a rivalry or tension that develops between people who are loyal to their section or region of the country. This area of sectionalism lasted from the 1810s to the 1860s. As a result of sectionalism, there were many political conflicts over issues important to each region. Question number 1, what was the balance between free and slave states? Well, in 1819, there were 11 free and 11 slave. Number 2, what three things led to a growing sectionalism between the North and South? Well, the different economies, political views, and ideas about slavery. Number 3, sectionalism is a rivalry or tension that develops between people who are loyal to their section or region of the country. The Missouri Compromise. Before 1819, the equal number of slave and free states balanced the sectional divide. In that year, however, Missouri applied to join the Union as a slave state. Immediately, a crisis erupted. Missouri's admission would give the South a majority in the Senate. Determined not to lose power, Northerners opposed letting Missouri enter as a slave state. Question number 4, why were Northerners upset when Missouri wanted to join the country in 1819? Well, that was going to tip the scales to the slave states. As you can see, the original 13 colonies, we had 7 free and 6 slave. And Vermont was added, so for a little bit there, the free states had an advantage. But then in our country, we added Kentucky and Tennessee, so we had balance in 1796. And then we added Ohio, and that was counterbalanced by Louisiana. And then we added Indiana, which was balanced by Mississippi. And then Illinois, woohoo, in 1818, and that was balanced by Alabama in 1819. The argument lasted many months. During the long debate, Maine had also applied for statehood. Finally, Senator Henry Clay suggested admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. His plan, the Missouri Compromise, kept the number of slave and free states equal. Under the provisions of the Missouri Compromise, Congress drew an imaginary line extending the southern border of Missouri at latitude 3630, pointed here. Slavery was permitted in the part of the Louisiana Purchase south of that line. It was banned north of the line. The only exception was Missouri itself. So question number 5, the Missouri Compromise kept the number of slave and free states equal by allowing in Missouri as a slave state, Maine as a free state. Question number 6, which candidate proposed this? This was Henry Clay, good old Henry Clay. Number 7, how was the Missouri Compromise imaginary slave line drawn? Well, they basically drew a line at the latitude of 3630, and they said anything from the Louisiana Purchase that was south of that line would be slave. Anything north of that line would be free, and Missouri would be the one exception. How did Western expansion increase tensions? The Missouri Compromise applied only to the Louisiana Purchase. By 1846, however, there were rumblings of a war with Mexico, and the United States expected to gain vast new lands. Once again, the question of slavery in the territories arose. The Wilmot Proviso divides Congress. Many Northerners feared that the South would extend slavery into the West. Congressman David Wilmot of Pennsylvania called for a law to ban slavery in any territories won from Mexico. Southern leaders angrily opposed this Wilmot Proviso. They said that Congress had no right to ban slavery in the West. The House passed the Wilmot Proviso in 1846, but the Senate defeated it. So now we can answer a couple of questions here. Question number 8, why did the possibility of a war with Mexico in the 1840s cause some tension? Well, because Southerners wanted to take the land won from winning that war and make it in the slave states, because if you think about it, it would be south of the Missouri Compromise line. Northerners were like, no, we do not want this to happen. Number 9, what was the purpose of the Wilmot Proviso? It was to basically say any land won in the War of Mexico would not be allowed to have slavery. Number 10, why would it make sense that the Wilmot Proviso would pass in the House and not in the Senate? Well, the way our system is set up, the House of Representatives is determined by population, and in the northern states, because we allowed for immigration and had industry and factory jobs, a lot of immigrants flooded to the northern part, like Irish people, for the example, the potato famine, and so there were a lot more people in the northern states. Therefore, they would have more people in the House of Representatives. But in the Senate, where every state gets 2 senators, because the number of slave states and free states was equal, then of course the South is going to be able to stop that from passing. Opposing views. As the debate over slavery heated up, people took sides. Abolitionists believed slavery was morally wrong and wanted it banned throughout the country. Southern slaveholders thought that slavery should be allowed in any territory. They also demanded that enslaved African Americans who escaped to the North be returned to them. Even white Southerners who did not own enslaved African Americans generally agreed with these ideas. Between these two extremes, some moderates argued that the Missouri Compromise line should be extended west all the way to the Pacific. Any new state north of the line would be a free state. Any new state south of the line could allow slavery. Other moderates felt that slavery should be allowed where it existed, but it should not be expanded to new territories. Still, others supported the idea of popular sovereignty, or the right of people to create their government. Under popular sovereignty, voters in a territory would decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery. So we got a lot of questions to answer here. Number 11, what stance did Northern abolitionists take over the issue of slavery? They believed that slavery was morally wrong and should have it banned throughout the country. Number 12, what stance did Southern slaveholders take over the issue of slavery? They believed slavery should be allowed in any territory, and they also demanded that enslaved African Americans who had escaped be returned to them. Number 13, what stance did moderates who believed in the Missouri Compromise line take? They believed that the Missouri Compromise line should just keep on going all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Any state north of the line would be free. Any state south of the line would have slaves. Number 14, what was another stance taken by moderates over the issue of slavery? Well, some believed that slavery should be allowed where it currently was, but should not expand. So if you had slavery now, you can keep it. If you don't have slavery now, you don't get to start it. And then number 15, popular sovereignty. That is the right of people to create their own government. Number 16, what stance did popular sovereignty moderates take over the issue of slavery? They believed that people in a territory should be able to vote for themselves whether or not to have slavery. So let the people in that state/territory make the decision for themselves. The Free Soil Party opposes slavery in the West. By 1848, many Northern Democrats and Whigs opposed the spread of slavery. However, with the presidential election ahead, leaders of both parties refused to take a stand for fear of losing Southern votes. Some also feared that the slavery issue would split the nation. In 1848, anti-slavery members of both parties met in Buffalo, New York. There, they founded the Free Soil Party. The party's main goal was to keep slavery out of the Western territories. Only a few Free Soilers were abolitionists who wanted to end slavery in the South. Question number 17. Even though many Northern Democrats and Whigs opposed slavery, what were the two main reasons why they didn't want to take a stand on slavery in the election of 1848? Well, number one, they didn't want to lose Southern votes. And number two, they felt like discussing it might cause the country to split in two. Question number 18. What type of people created the Free Soil Party in 1848? Well, people who were anti-slavery members of both the Democrats and Whigs decided, you know what, if our parties are not going to talk about this, then let's create our own party. Number 19, the main goal of the Free Soil Party was to keep slavery out of the Western territories. In the 1848 presidential campaign, Free Soilers named former President Martin Van Buren as their candidate. Democrats chose Lewis Cass of Michigan. The Whigs selected Zachary Taylor, a hero of the 1848 Mexican-American War. For the first time, slavery was an important election issue. Van Buren called for a ban on slavery in the Mexican Cession, the land ceded by Mexico after the 1848 war. Cass supported popular sovereignty. Taylor did not speak on the issue, but he was a slave owner from Louisiana, so many Southern voters assumed that he supported slavery. Zachary Taylor won the election. Still, Van Buren took 10% of the popular vote, and 13 other Free Soil candidates won seats in Congress. The Free Soil Party's success showed that slavery had become a national issue. So number 20, who were the three candidates in the election of 1848? What party did they represent, and what was their stance on slavery? Well, first of all, we have former President Martin Van Buren representing the Free Soilers, and their policy towards slavery was no slavery in the Mexican Cession. Secondly, you had Lewis Cass supporting or representing the Democrats, and he believed in popular sovereignty. let the people vote in those territories whether or not they would have slavery or not. And then you had Zachary Taylor, the Whig. And he didn't talk about slavery. He kept his mouth shut on it, but people assumed because he was a slave owner that he was pro-slavery. Question 21. What was the outcome of the election of 1848? Zachary Taylor was the winner. Here is a map of the election of 1848. And as you can see, the country was fairly evenly split. Even the popular votes were pretty close if you look at it. And notice the states won. Taylor won 15 states, but Lewis Cass also won 15 states. Clearly, the country was split. California reignites the slavery debate. For a time after the Missouri Compromise, both slave and free states entered the Union peacefully. However, when California requested admission to the Union as a free state in 1850, the balance of power in the Senate was once again threatened. Conflict and compromise. In 1849, there were 15 slave states and 15 free states. Admitting California as a free state would upset the balance. Moreover, it seemed possible that Oregon, Utah, and New Mexico might also join the Union as free states. Many Southerners feared that the South would be hopelessly outvoted in the Senate. Some even suggested that Southern states might want to secede or remove themselves from the United States. Northern congressmen, meanwhile, argued that California should enter the Union as a free state because most of the territory lay north of the Missouri Compromise line. It was clear that the nation faced a crisis. So now we can answer question 22. What was the balance of free and slave states in 1849? Well, at that time there were 15 free and 15 slave. 23. Why were Southerners upset when California wanted to be admitted as a state in 1849? Well, it's the reverse argument of when the North was upset about Missouri. They did not want to lose their balance of power in the Senate. Furthermore, they could see the handwriting on the wall. Well, not only is it going to be California, but eventually it's going to be Oregon, Utah, New Mexico. We're going to be outvoted. 24. Define secede. Secede means to withdraw or remove yourself from the country. 25. When the California crisis emerged, what did some Southerners suggest that their state should do? They suggested secession or seceding from the country. Conflicts between Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. Henry Clay had won the nickname the Great Compromiser for working out the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise Tariff of 1833, which resolved the nullification crisis. Now, decades later, the 73-year-old Clay was frail and ill. Still, he pleaded for the North and South to reach an agreement. If they failed to do so, Clay warned, the nation could break apart. Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina had worked with Clay to pass the Compromise Tariff of 1833, but now he opposed compromise over the extension of slavery to the West. He drafted a speech expressing his opposition. Calhoun was dying of tuberculosis and could not speak loudly enough to address the Senate. He stared defiantly at his northern foes, while Senator James Mason of Virginia read his speech. Question number 26. What nickname had Henry Clay received? The Great Compromiser. 27. Which South Carolina senator opposed Henry Clay? John C. Calhoun. Calhoun insisted slavery be allowed in the Western territories. In addition, he demanded that fugitives, or African Americans who had fled slavery, be returned to their owners. He wanted Northerners to admit that slaveholders had the right to reclaim their, quote, property. Calhoun's demands were based on his belief in states' rights. He believed the federal government's power over the states was limited. As Calhoun saw it, states had chosen to give authority to the federal government. Therefore, he believed, states had the right to decide how much authority to give, and they could cancel the agreement if they wished. If the North rejected the South's demands, Calhoun told the Senate, quote, let the states agree to part in peace. If you are unwilling that we should part in peace, tell us so, and we shall know what to do. Everyone knew what Calhoun meant. If an agreement could not be reached, the South would use force to leave the Union. Oh my. Question 28. Define fugitives. Fugitives were African Americans who had fled slavery. Question 29. What demands did Senator Calhoun propose at this time? Well, number one, he demanded that slaveholders had the right to reclaim their property. He also said, hey, you need to return those slaves, and we have the right to leave the country if we want to, and if you don't accept what we're wanting, we're going to get out of here. We're going to leave this country. We're going to secede. And that answers question 31. Calhoun's threat was secession. Daniel Webster offers compromise. Daniel Webster of Massachusetts spoke next. He had opposed Clay's compromise tariff of 1833. Now he supported Clay's plea to save the Union. Webster stated his position clearly. Primary source, Daniel Webster, 1850, speech in the U.S. Senate. I speak today not as a Massachusetts man, nor as a Northern man, but as an American. I speak today for the preservation of the Union. There can be no such thing as a peaceable secession. Webster opposed the concept of states' rights. He believed that in a union the federal authority was supreme. He feared that the states could not separate without suffering a bloody civil war. A civil war is a war between people of the same country. Like many Northerners, Webster viewed slavery as evil. The breakup of the United States, however, he believed was worse. To save the Union, Webster was willing to compromise. He would support Southern demands that Northerners be forced to return fugitives from slavery. Question number 32. What was the main point of the speech that Senator Webster gave? His main speech was, listen, whatever our disagreements are, we cannot have secession. We cannot have a civil war. That's what secession will cause. It was a plea to keep the country together. Question 33. A civil war is a war between people of the same country. Question 34. Daniel Webster's views on slavery and secession were, while he opposed slavery, he was more fearful of secession and the breaking up of the country. A compromise holds the Union together. In 1850, as the debate raged, both Calhoun and President Taylor died. The new president was Millard Fillmore. Unlike Taylor, he encouraged Clay to seek a compromise. The Compromise of 1850 addresses regional concerns. Henry Clay gave more than 70 speeches in favor of compromise. At last, Clay proposed the Compromise of 1850. By then, however, he had become too sick to continue. Stephen Douglas of Illinois took up the fight for him and guided Clay's plan through Congress. Question number 35. Which two deaths helped the country come to a compromise in 1850? That was the deaths of both John C. Calhoun and President Zachary Taylor. Number 36. Which Illinois senator helped push Henry Clay's Compromise of 1850 through the Senate? That was Illinois' very own Stephen Douglas. The Compromise of 1850 had 5 main provisions. First, it allowed California to enter the Union as a free state. There would be 16 free states and 15 slave states. Second, it divided the rest of the Mexican cession into the territories of New Mexico and Utah. Voters in each state would decide the slavery question by popular sovereignty. Third, it ended the slave trade in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. Congress, however, declared that it had no power to ban the slave trade between slave states. Fourth, it included a strict fugitive slave law. Fifth, it settled a border dispute between Texas and New Mexico. So for question 37, what were the 5 provisions of the Compromise of 1850? Number 1, it allowed California to enter as a free state. Number 2, it split the rest of the Mexican cession into the territories of New Mexico and Utah, and they would decide slavery there by popular sovereignty. Third, it ended the slave trade in D.C. Fourth, it said that there would be a strict fugitive slave law. And fifth, it settled the border dispute between Texas and New Mexico. The Fugitive Slave Act helps the South. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 replaced the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, which slave owners believed was too weak. Under the 1793 law, many Northerners had refused to cooperate with slave owners who were trying to capture escapees and return them to slavery. The new law required all citizens to help catch African Americans trying to escape slavery. People who let fugitives escape could be fined $1,000 and jailed. The Fugitive Slave Act also set up special courts to handle the cases of runaways. Suspects were not allowed a jury trial. Judges received $10 for sending an accused runaway to slavery, but only $5 for setting someone free. Lured by the extra money, some judges sent African Americans to the South whether or not they were runaways. Question number 39. Why were many Northerners angry about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850? Well, they were angry because, number 1, they didn't think slavery was right to begin with. Number 2, now they were being told they had to be a part of the process, where if a slave that had escaped was in the North, it was not only their suspected thing that they had to do, they actually were required by law to do it, or they would face a possible sentence of jail and a fine. They did not like that whatsoever. Northern anger over the Fugitive Slave Act. The Compromise of 1850 had the effect of holding the Union together for a while longer. However, the conflict between the North and the South over the issue of slavery and its expansion remained. Many in the North and in the South were not satisfied with the compromise. Anti-slavery Northerners were particularly angry about the Fugitive Slave Act. By forcing them to catch runaways, the law made Northerners part of the slave system. Northerners found it harder to believe that slavery was a Southern problem that they could ignore. In several Northern cities, crowds protested by trying to rescue fugitives from their captors. To counter the Fugitive Slave Act, many Northern states passed personal liberty laws. These laws made it harder to recapture those accused of running away. The laws brought suspects before judges, provided jury trials, and prohibited kidnapping. Some laws also gave legal assistance. One state, Vermont, declared free any enslaved person who entered the state. Southerners were outraged by these laws and called any interference with the Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional. And now we can continue with question 39. Why were many Northerners angry about the Fugitive Slave Act? We already touched on that before, but I would also add this line here that they said that they made them feel like they were part of the slave system. I thought that was a very good line that the textbook said. Question number 40. What were some measures that the Northern states took to fight back against the Fugitive Slave Act? Well, some states just tried to ignore it. Other states passed these personal liberty laws that made it harder to recapture those accused of running away. They also gave suspects judges, jury trials, and they made it illegal to kidnap. And they also gave some legal assistance. And even Vermont said, if you come to our state, you are free. So these were some of the ways that they fought back against the Fugitive Slave Act. A book sways the North against slavery. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe of New England published a novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin. The novel shows the evils of slavery and the injustice of the Fugitive Slave Act. A powerful story appeals to Northerners. Stowe told the story of Uncle Tom, an enslaved African American known for his kindness and piety. Tom's world is shattered when he is bought by the brutal Simon Legree. When Tom refuses to reveal the whereabouts of two runaways, Legree whips him to death. The novel quickly became a bestseller. The first printing of 5,000 copies sold out in 2 days. Within a year, 300,000 copies were sold. Eventually, the book sold millions of copies and was translated into dozens of languages. Question number 41. What novel was published by Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1852? Uncle Tom's Cabin. Here are a couple of facts about Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was published in 1852. She was an abolitionist who wrote the book in response to the Fugitive Slave Act. Uncle Tom is the main character. He is eventually killed at the end of the story, not to be a spoiler, but when he is told, you are going to tell me where these runaway slaves are, he said, no, I'm not going to. And so they kill Uncle Tom. It sold 300,000 copies in its first year. It was the best-selling novel of the 19th century and the second best-selling book of the 19th century. What was the best-selling book? I'm going to pause my thoughts right now for you to give a chance to say your answer out loud. What did you say? If you said the Bible, you are correct. It has been said that when Abraham Lincoln met Stowe at the start of the Civil War, he stated, "So, this is the little lady who made this big war." Uncle Tom's Cabin made both sides mad. It made Northerners mad because they hated the cruelty that was described in the book. Southerners were mad because they felt it was an inaccurate portrayal of what the slavery system was actually like. Uncle Tom's Cabin, one of the most important books in American history. Nationwide reaction is mixed. Although Uncle Tom's Cabin was popular in the North, Southerners objected to it. They claimed that it did not give a true picture of slave life and did not show the good side of slavery. Yeah, good side of slavery, whatever. Indeed, Stowe had seen little of slavery firsthand. Despite such objections, Uncle Tom's Cabin helped change the way Northerners felt about slavery. No longer could they ignore slavery as a political problem for Congress to settle. More and more Northerners now saw slavery as a moral problem facing every American. For this reason, Uncle Tom's Cabin, much like this axe here, splitting the country in two, it was one of the most important books in American history. Well, thank you for watching. Since we talked about compromise in this video, I thought this joke would be appropriate. Fine, we'll compromise. I'll get my way, and you'll find a way to be okay with that. Thank you, and have a nice day.